This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports. You're listening to TGI Sports Talk with your host Keith Angle on Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning, guys. Keith Angle for TGI Sports Talk right here on the Northeast Streaming Sports Network. I hope you guys are doing well. This is to let you know, because we don't like to act like the networks. This is not plausibly live. We have recorded this interview on Wednesday, November 17th. You're seeing this on Black Friday. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, everybody. I hope the weather was good and the travel was easy and everybody had a safe and happy holiday. Want to thank my guest from last week, who was Uwe von Schamann, the former kicker from the Miami Dolphins and the Oklahoma Sooners. We had a great conversation, and we wish him well. I know he's in Germany celebrating the holidays, so happy holidays to you. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Uwe, and your family. And my guests today we're going to be talking about remembering the NBA, and we're going to focus a bit on the Nets, but we're going to kind of go, around the board as much as we can. I'm going to have Stephen Gold, who's a moderator of honoring and remembering the ABA 1967 to 1976. And also George Girasa, and I hope I'm saying George's name right. George is the moderator of the Horace Clarke Years, but he's also an ABA and New York Net from that era aficionado. So he is the number one fan of the New York Nets from the ABA. And with that, I'm going to bring both our guests in. Steven's going to be a bit mysterious today because we're having a little bit of camera issues. So he'll be the black screen in the middle of myself and George. How are you guys tonight?
Good.
Good.
Great.
Good to have you guys on. The ABA, gosh, when I was a kid growing up, I watched the NBA. In upstate New York here, we couldn't get a lot of games. I think I told George this when we were talking, and I used to love it when every once in a while we'd get a game on, I think HBO. I'd be at my grandparents'. I think HBO might have had a contract with the ABA or somebody. We get a game, I'd be so excited. And I want to talk tonight with you guys about, your memories of the ABA and the knowledge of the ABA and everything we can kind of cover about the ABA in the next 50 minutes or so. So I'm looking forward to this, guys. Who wants to take it away? Let's start with the ABA in general, and I guess maybe we'll start with you, Stephen. What prompted in 1967 the founding of this league? I know there have been some precursors to it that didn't work and they folded fairly quickly.
Yeah, the ABL was precursor.
Yeah, in fact, I remember George Steinbrenner was involved with a Cleveland team.
Yeah, he was the owner of the Cleveland Pipers. Yes.
Yeah.
A group of men. George Mikan. They asked him to be the commissioner. The great George Mikan.
Yeah.
Dick Tinkham, Mike Storin, Dennis Murphy. They wanted to form a new exciting league, to kind of offer a different game than the NBA was offering, a faster, more exciting league with a 3-point shot to open up the lane, which would make less of a half-court game, that the NBA was, just going into the big man and more half-court, whereas the ABA was an exciting, fast break league, and it worked.
Did a lot of these owners, I think I remember reading too that the NBA was having trouble expanding or getting themselves in expansion mode. There were owners that wanted to get involved, and that also played into this a bit because there were people that wanted to get involved but couldn't with the NBA.
Yes, and the franchises were offered up at less money to buy in, and it offered these people a chance to become owners in the ABA.
Yeah, and it expanded the job pool, obviously, for players, and a lot more players got a chance to play. A lot of really good players got their start in the ABA long before they were in the NBA. What was the? I mean, were the guys that came? I mean, obviously, there was 2 dual drafts, and what prompted these players to decide to go to the NBA or the ABA over the NBA when there had to be? I know there was a lot of money thrown around, and again, from my experience, I don't know how much of it was real money and how much these guys actually end up seeing.
Yeah, they had a Dolgoff plan, which they paid out money over many, many, many years. So it actually seemed more than it was. And but the money was basically a lot of, and the opportunity was, the main reason why they chose the ABA over the NBA. More jobs.
I mean, there had to be guys like, if I remember right, too, one of the other things that the NBA was, a precursor, not precursor, but led into was the hardship draft. And I think Spencer Haywood, who was a great, great player in college, was one of the first or the first player ever to get drafted in hardship in professional basketball.
The youngest ever MVP of the ABA in 1969, 1970. He actually had probably the greatest single season in ABA history. He averaged 30 points a game and 20 rebounds.
I mean, early in the existence of the league was that somebody that had to be somebody who brought instant credibility to the league, right? What were the other credibility factors that played into the league?
Well, Rick Barry coming over was probably the first thing that lent credibility to the ABA, even though they had great stars, Mel Daniels, Roger Brown, but Rick Barry coming over in 1968, 1969 for the Oakland Oaks, that kind of put the ABA pretty much on the map.
And Barry had to set out a year too, didn't he?
Yeah.
When did Connie Hawkins come?
Connie came in 67, 68.
Yeah, what happened was I think the ABA was taking players the NBA didn't want for one reason or another.
Sure. A lot of players like that. Freddie Lewis started in the NBA.
Yeah.
I think the ABA was a star. Roger Brown, another guy that the NBA didn't want, came to the ABA. He was a star.
He never got a chance to play in the NBA either, even after the merger, right? Roger Brown, he was a great player.
Right. And they proved it in the ABA. Brown and Hawkins, just two of the main ones.
And Hawkins, if I remember right, he couldn't play in the NBA because he was involved in whether the stories are accurate or not. He was involved or allegedly involved in some kind of gambling racket or.
I think Roger Brown was also accused of that, but that was not proven.
Yeah, but the reasons they had to go to the ABA, right? Because they couldn't, at that time, at least get into the NBA.
Yes.
Yeah, and obviously, when you're starting up a new league, or even if you got an established league, you've got to have strong teams in places like New York and the hubs. And they did have a team in New York, and obviously in the Nets who had really good success at different times in the NBA. I mean, obviously once, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, they got really good when Dr. J was there, but they were good before that.
Yeah.
But the NBA didn't really have really strong franchises in a lot of the big cities, if I'm not mistaken either, right, Stephen?
Yeah, the NBA was hurting also.
The
NBA at that time was hurting also. And the ABA was up against it to start a new league when even the NBA wasn't succeeding financially. But they survived, and in my opinion, from 1971-72 through 1975-76, the ABA was the better league in terms of top teams and talent. And they caught up to the NBA in the NBA had a 25-year head start, and within 5 years, the ABA caught up, and they were. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, good point. And again, I think, in my opinion, the Nets getting better and luring guys like Rick Barry, who came over and played in Oakland when he first got here for, I believe Pat Boone actually owned that franchise, right? The Oaks. And then his father-in-law coached him, I think.
Yeah, Bruce Hale was his father-in-law, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why he came over. But
and that team folded after 1 year of Barry being there, and he ended up and maybe you can tell the story of how he actually ended up with the Nets.
Well, he didn't want to go to the Virginia Squires, the Washington Capitals, and moved to Virginia. He didn't want to go to the Virginia Squires, and so he came to the Nets. He came over to the Nets, and it was good for the Nets. In 71-72, he led them to the finals.
Yeah, and they also lured, and I want to get George involved here too as we start to talk a little bit more now about the Nets, and we'll go back to some of the other teams. I mean, they lured Louis Carnesecca away from St. John's, which always amazed me. Still amazes me today that Louis left St. John's to go coach the Nets. But
my wife was the announcer for St. John's, and she just loves Louis Carnesecca. You should talk to her about him someday. She just adores him, the man, because especially one time when she got left behind in Baltimore and how he let her on the plane, for the players. Yeah.
Oh, cool. What led him? I mean, maybe George, you've got some input, or Steve.
Well, I don't think anybody knows. I think they just offered him a lot of money, and he wanted to try the pros. And if you look at the early Nets teams, even before he took over, they had a lot of guys from St. John's.
Yeah.
And so I think that he was able to say, I'm going to try this. And, he obviously didn't like it, or maybe he didn't like playing in front of the small crowds, although the Nets would have had more than most people. But they had so many arenas early on, the Nets. I remember my father would take me out to these places, and, he aggravated at how small they were.
Yeah, I mean, he was there 3 years, and they had some good success because he went to the finals one year with Barry, I believe, right? But I mean, what led him to leave? Because he left. They were actually at probably the nadir of where his success was with the team. Did he just not like the pro game?
I think that was it.
That's all it was.
Yeah.
I mean, he probably loved having all his players from St. John's. I could think of at least 4 off the top of my head, and I'm sure there were more. There were others that just popped in and out.
Who are those? Who are those guys? Give me them off the top.
Billy Paultz was there. Hang on a second. Sonny Dove. Was it Ollie? There's a guy that actually has his number retired for St. John's, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head now.
I think Billy Schaefer. Billy Schaefer.
Yeah, Billy Schaefer. That's not the one that has the number retired, though. But Billy Schaefer was there. Let me see if I could see them on my. Was Manny Leaks from there, or was he from somewhere else?
Manny Leaks. I'm not sure.
I mean, there could have been Manny Leaks and Ollie Taylor. I know the guy I'm thinking of, Joe Dupree.
Yep.
There you go.
Joe Dupree was from there. Sonny Dove was from St. John's. Of course, Billy Paultz. So, he had – and then there were a lot of guys whose names I'm now not going to remember. But if you actually get on, like, I guess the NBA Pro Reference, you'll see that he had a lot of guys come in for a couple of games, but they just weren't pro players.
What about, we were going to have Brian Taylor on with us tonight, and Brian does send his text me his apologies that he couldn't make his travel arrangements, adjust them so he could be with us tonight. We'll have him on another time, though, because I really would love to chat with him as well. He came, I think, in Louis' last year, if I'm not mistaken.
He was my first favorite player.
Brian
he came
Taylor?
right at the age where I could differentiate between them. If you don't mind, I'd like to tell a little story how I became a Nets fan.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Jump in.
That's the thing I find most interesting. Of course, when I was a little boy in kindergarten, first grade, all my friends were Knicks fans, and I wanted to be a Knicks fan. They had Willis Reed, Walt Frazier. They had just won a championship. And my father had a law office, and his partner was a councilman in the Bronx. And so he could get Yankee tickets on demand, even when they made the World Series. Any of the big games like Old Timers Day, we had great seats for. We could also get Giants tickets when they were still at Yankee Stadium. But we couldn't get the Knicks tickets because they were in Manhattan. And he couldn't even buy them. They were always sold out during those years. My father couldn't. And to make up for it, he took us out to Long Island to see the Nets. And my father, who I always thought was a tall guy, I'll never forget, we were in the first row behind the bench. That's how easy it was to get good seats. And my father was standing up, and a guy, I'm guessing was Billy Paultz. I wouldn't know because I was only about 5 at the time, stood up next to him. And I was like, my God, look how tall he is. He's like, I landed a Giants. And then, of course, I started seeing Brian Taylor shoot 3-point shots, which was just amazing. And John Williamson, the way he made the ball spin, you don't remember that, but anybody who watched
I do.
Nets,
Actually, I do. Yeah.
And then, of course, I like to say I got to see Man fly when they got Julius Erving.
Super Jet. They had some great, colorful players. I mean, before Irving got there,
I brought this out. This was my basketball jersey in high school. You could see what number I wore. 23 for John Williamson.
Well, there you go.
In there. Yeah. So
what?
I met Brian Taylor at his second year, start of his second year, and I asked him how he thought he would do in his second year, and he said, "I'm positive. I always think positive." And he was my second favorite Net, aside from the Dr. J. That's when I became a Net fan, when Dr. J came to the Nets in 1973, 1974, and I watched them on, I believe, Channel 9, if I can remember that far back, WOR with Steve Albert and Bob Goldschmidt, and listened to John Sterling and Mike DiTomaso, who were the Nets radio announcers. Most people don't realize that.
There were some great announcers who got their start in the ABA. Bob Costas got his start with the Spirit, right?
Yep,
I did not know. Yeah, I didn't know that until I read the book by Terry Pluto years ago. I was like, that amazed me. But I remember how much I hated the Spirits of St. Louis for beating my Nets.
Yeah,
I was like 10 or 11 then. I was like, how the hell did that happen?
You got to Google the Spirit. You can find actually a couple of games, and Bob Costas is doing the games, and it's really interesting to watch that. Stephen, and one of you guys, I don't know if either one of you know the story, but there's a great story that Bob Costas tells about Marvin Bad News Barnes, who was on the St. Louis Spirit at that time, and obviously was quite the character. Tire iron Marvin, but they were sitting in an airport, and I think they were only going from like St. Louis to Kentucky or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And there was a time zone change. They flying and leaving later than they were going to arrive. They were going to arrive earlier than when they left. And Marvin's staring at the TV monitor, and he goes, and he's just perplexed. And Costas asked him, "What's going on, Marvin? What's wrong?" He goes, "I don't know about you, Bob, but I ain't getting in no time machine." He said,
"That's a classic."
I love that story. I wish I could tell it as well as Bob Costas, but it's a great story. So, I mean, Marvin Barnes is kind of indicative of some of the characters that were in the league. He was a great player, and it's too bad that the NBA never got to see the best of guys like Marvin Barnes. They never got to see the best of Connie Hawkins when he got there because, he was older and his knees were shot. And
what amazes me is how good Julius Erving was, even after a couple knee surgeries.
That's right.
And so even the NBA didn't get to see him at full force, and he was still a Hall of Famer in the NBA.
Yeah. I do remember kind of wondering, did I see the best of Julius Erving when he got to the NBA? And it's obvious. You're right. As good as he was, I mean, you watch the highlights of him in the NBA, and it's just like night and day to me. That
he did it in spurts. He didn't have to be counted on constantly like he was in the ABA. When he came to the NBA, he did it in spurts. He became more of a team player, and he still got the results. He was MVP.
Great rebounder in the ABA too, and those numbers didn't carry over to the NBA. But I know the game was a little different. He was probably playing a bit of a different position, but I mean, he averaged 12 rebounds a game some years, right?
15 rebounds a game his first year.
That's amazing. I mean, he's only 6 foot. I'm not that he's small, but 6'6", and maybe it's because. I mean, what do you attribute that to, I guess, Stephen, as far as Dr. J, when he gets to the NBA? I agree with the whole, he played in sports, you saw the old Dr. J, but what about just that part of the game? Why was that so much more prominent in the ABA than the NBA?
Well, when he first started on the Virginia Squires, he was, he had Charlie Scott with him, but they didn't have a lot of great big men. So he was counted on to rebound more, and when he couldn't dunk when he was in college, and he could now in the ABA. So he was just more free, and he was able to express himself more. And then he obviously did it with the Nets when he came over to my Nets, and he did it, like I said, he did it in the NBA as well. It's just that he didn't have to do it every single night like he did in the ABA, but he did it and he came through. in the clutch in the NBA as well.
Well, he played on some great teams with the Nets. I mean, and we've talked a little bit about the Nets, but and they have to fit in this category. But of the teams that played during the let's call them the golden years of the ABA, I mean, who are the best teams, the best franchises outside of the Nets? I mean, obviously the Colonels come to mind and such, but in your mind, who are the top? Because franchises came and went, right? Like every year you'd have a bunch of new franchises and franchises that folded.
Well, the Indiana Pacers were the model franchise of the ABA.
Yeah,
they won the 3 championship, appeared in more finals, and they were the stable franchise. But you had the Denver Nuggets franchise. They started as the Denver Rockets.
Yeah,
San Antonio Spurs, which started as the Dallas Chaparrals, and the Nets, and Kentucky. Those were probably the 4 most stable top franchises in the ABA.
And as far how about we talked about the Pacers and there's some great coaches. It brings me because Slick Leonard to me is another guy that I saw a great documentary on not too long ago on YouTube someplace. He was quite a character and probably underrated as a coach, but a lot of great coaches got their start in the ABA. Slick Leonard. Kevin Lawfrey for George's Nets. Kevin Lawfrey became a really good coach there.
Larry Brown, UB Brown.
Let's not bring up Larry Brown.
I brought that up just for you, George. I wanted to talk a little about Larry Brown. I never
like to say I hate somebody like a professional athlete, but I think I could hate Larry Brown.
Oh, yeah, why did you hate Larry Brown?
Oh God, you don't know this story. He
doesn't fit in the ABA though. That story, George.
It doesn't fit in the ABA, so we have to save it for when we talk about the Nets and the NBA.
Okay.
We'll save that. But Larry Brown you have to admit, got his start in the ABA coaching, and he got off to it was a nomadic coaching career, but he certainly got off.
Going to watch this. He feels the same way about Larry Brown.
Yeah.
But it makes me feel that a lot of Denver players blame Larry Brown for losing that 6th game in 1976 to the Nets.
Tell us why.
His coaching, the way he coached it. Just leave it at that, but that's what I read.
Nothing specific that they brought up, just the fact that he didn't coach well. I mean,
I think there were substitutions in regard to substitutions that some of the Denver players I read were upset with. And including that miraculous, during that miraculous net comeback from the third quarter when they were down 22, and they came back and won, in large part to Zoop, John Williamson.
Yeah.
Ryan Taylor also had a great game, and of course the doctor.
And
Jumbo Jim Akins also had a great game that game. 15 rebounds, 15 points, 11 rebounds.
That was the last game. I think that's the only Nets game they have complete is that game. It was on HBO, and HBO saved it.
That's probably the one I remember watching to my grandparents, probably.
Yeah. Well, the Nets were on some weird channels because New York. I don't know. Are you from New York, Keith?
I'm upstate near Albany, and my grandparents got cable. They were like the first ones who ever got cable near me. So I probably saw something on WOR.
Yeah, Lower New York had like a lot of in addition to the 3 main channels, you had I don't remember what Channel 5 was, and then there was Channel 9 and Channel 11 that but we also had those UHF channels, and I think the Nets showed up on there once in a while too.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I know I used to watch games. I think they used to have a lot of tape delayed games because my aunt who I'm living with right now is in the other room. She used to stay up late with me to watch the games.
Well. Yeah. While we're on coaches, I want to ask you, I won't go back to Larry Brown. We'll get off him for you, George. Let me talk about another one of your coaches because he had great success with the Nets, but no success once he got to the NBA, really. In fact, he coached one of the worst teams in the history of the NBA in Philadelphia. Kevin Lawfrey, I mean, was he a good coach, or was it just the players were that good?
I think he had good players and that responded to him. So it was a combination of the two. The players liked him. Even his last year on the Nets, when I think they had one of the worst teams, the players, I think it was, as a matter of fact, it was, the Yankee announcer guy. I just lost his name. I remember him talking about it. Yes, Sterling talking about how hard they were playing in the fourth quarter, down by 20 points with 5 minutes left. Because they weren't just tossing. They were like trying everything to win. And so, I guess he could get guys to play, but they had some talent on those Nets teams.
Landry was a player's coach.
Irving all by himself before the knee surgeries would have, if he didn't have knee surgeries, you might be talking about him in the same vein as Michael Jordan. But as my father once said, there's more people that would have been the greatest ever, if not for this, that, or the other thing, that are the greatest. So
for me, Irving and Jordan are the same. I rate Doc just up there. When Doc, a lot of people don't realize how great Doc was defensively. When he retired in 1987, he led pro basketball in steals.
Yeah.
He was the pro basketball leader in steals, and he had 12 seasons of at least 100 steals and 100 blocked shots in the same season. Larry Bird didn't have any of those.
By the way, I checked Irving's rebounds, and he averaged 7 and 8, between 7 and 8 point something in the NBA until later in his career when obviously he was getting older. But
right, and that's
a lot of rebounds. There's a lot of years the league leader has like 9.1, and he had 8.6 one year, 8.2. That's a lot for a small forward, which is what he became when he came to the NBA.
But yeah, Landry was a player's coach. In fact, he made a key move. Bill Melchioni was starting. The Nets had started off bad in that first championship year, 73-74.
Yep.
And he made a move. He inserted Super John in for Bill Melchioni, and he brought Mel off the bench, and that spurred them. They won like 8, 9 in a row, and that spurred them on. And
Melchioni was a big fan favorite himself, wasn't he? I mean, that must have been a difficult.
Three-point ABA assist leader. He was he was an all-star. But
he's a fan favorite. But I don't know if he was. I don't really know a lot about his career outside of the Nets, but at the time he was replaced, he should have been replaced. I mean, Williamson was clearly the better guard.
Well, yeah.
They had guys like Larry Keenan, and they even had, they didn't have that deep a bench like people think, but they had some guys. Their first 7 guys were as good as any 7 in the NBA.
Well, Landry was good. He was good at knowing his players. And in fact, when they lost in 74-75 to St. Louis, Dr. J told me that the main reason they lost was because they were so tired at the end that they couldn't match. Even though they had beaten the Spirits 11 straight games and the first playoff game to make it 12 straight, they were so pooped because they went all out that they didn't have the energy. And he said that was the main reason why they lost. So at the end of the following season, 75-76, Landry rested his stars. And they were full. They were at full energy, and Doc was, and that's why they won.
I don't feel like I can talk about the Nets without talking about a guy I remember, and it seems to be kind of unsung, and he died tragically in a plane accident. And Wendell Ladner. I mean, what are your memories of Wendell? He
was a wild guy, the Burt Reynolds of the ABA.
I remember him starting a fight. I think during the TV timeout there was a brawl. He ran over to the other team's bench. That was a game I was at.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I remember in 74-75 in the St. Louis playoff game, Freddie Lewis stole the ball from him, so he took his sneaker and he threw it and hit Freddie Lewis in the back, and Freddie Lewis turned around and got mad. He saw it was Wendell did it, and he said, "Oh, okay, no problem." Wendell was a character. He would hustle. He would dive into water coolers, and one instance in one game, he dived into a water cooler, got 40-something stitches maybe, came right back and played. He was great. And he was Dr. J's protector. The Nets got him to be Dr. J's protector because they said, you know what, if you keep playing against Wendell, he's going to break your leg. So we might as well get him on our team. And that was one of the main reasons why they made that trade for Mike Gale and Rose.
That's interesting. So lots of great players. We talked about Dr. J a lot here, but there's a lot of great players that got their start in the ABA and finally ended up in the NBA after the merger or even before. But you got Dr. J, you got Gilmore, you got Malone, you got Hawkins, you got George Garvin, Dan Issel, the list goes up, Maurice Lucas. What about some of the guys? What's that? David Thompson. How the heck did I miss David Thompson? Another guy NBA players or NBA fans never got to see the best of for a lot of different reasons. He was just a tremendous player, wasn't he, Stephen?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There was a lot of players in the ABA that did better in the NBA. The guys you just mentioned also did the same. or just as good. Issel, Ron Boone, Brian Taylor for a while.
Oh, yeah, another guy. How about some guys? And we already mentioned one I can think of, Roger Brown, who were great players in the ABA, but never ever got a chance to play in the NBA. Who were some of those other unsung guys that we don't think about because when the merger came about, their career was on a downside or whatever?
Well, Louis Dampier, Mel Daniels.
Yeah. You had that guy on St. Louis, Fly Williams.
Oh, Sly Williams, right? Or both? Wasn't there a Sly and a Fly?
Fly Williams, yeah.
He
was never a star in the ABA, but he was, he liked to shoot. Let's put it that way. Never made a shot he didn't like.
A lot of guys in the ABA like that.
Yeah. The ABA was also a good defensive league. Most people don't realize that. They had a lot of great defensive players. Bobby Jones, Willie Wise, Thad Taylor, Matt Calvin Matt Calvin's another guy in the NBA never really got to see because he got hurt.
Didn't he tear up his knee when he got to the Lakers? Yeah. Willie
Wise, one of the best two-way players at that time. I would grade him with the Busher for a while. Believe it or not, Willie Wise. But
I remember the name, and did he make it to the NBA at all after the merger? I don't remember if he played in the NBA or not.
I think he might have, but barely.
Just marginally, right?
You know who you guys are forgetting? George Garvin.
Yeah, I mentioned him as somebody came over. Because he was a great player. You know what? Nobody liked him, right? In the NBA, he looked like he could blow him over with a leaf, for crying out loud, or knock him over.
He took off in the NBA. Most people don't realize that in 1975-76, the best player on the Spurs was not George Garvin; it was James Silas. And
another guy got hurt, right?
Yeah, James Silas, Captain Lade. He was like the best guard in the ABA that last year. And then, he also got hurt and played. He came back a little, but he was nowhere near what he was because of the injuries.
So it became apparent, as the ABA was, again, they were flourishing in some places and really, empty arenas in other places, that this wasn't going to be tenable for the NBA or the ABA. I mean, what instigated the merger? Who instigated the merger, I guess, talks in the beginning, Stephen?
Well, the ABA always wanted to merge with the NBA.
Was that the goal all along? That was the
goal. They figured, they told the new owners, come on in, and once we merge with the NBA, the franchise, that you buy will be worth that much more. I think what the NBA was for the merger because they didn't like having to pay their players more to stop going over to the ABA. I think that was part of it. Also, and I think Dr. J, they wanted Dr. J. I think that was one of the main reasons, along with the other stars. But Dr. J, I think.
A couple more guys you guys may have forgotten about. There was Dan Issel and Ralph Simpson, who the NBA didn't get to see at all.
Ralph Simpson, that's right.
Ralph
and
Simpson.
Then somebody who the ABA barely saw, but then went, because I think he was only in the last year of the ABA, but he became a starter in the NBA, Marvin Webster.
Yeah, Marvin Webster, yeah.
God, I remember watching him play for the Knicks. He was terrible.
Man. His 1 year in the ABA, he was a good shot blocker and rebounder. But I don't think he ever reached his potential, if I'm not mistaken, in the NBA.
I think you're right. I think the thing that really spurred the merger was Dr. J. And, obviously the Nets had to come along. And then the Nets, and I think I talked a little about George about this. The ironic part is, as they tried to put this merger together, and you guys can elaborate on this when I get through here, the ironic part is the ABA wasn't coming without the Nets. And the Nets, by the time they got to the NBA, couldn't afford, because they wanted Irving. And by the time they got to the NBA, they couldn't afford Irving anymore. So
how did this? The Knicks. The Knicks put out some clause in the NBA bylaws that they had to pay the Knicks all this money, and they couldn't afford to pay Irving and the Knicks. So to keep the franchise, they had to trade Irving, and that's why I now hate the Knicks. Otherwise, I never would have hated
the Knicks. Exactly. The Knicks charged the Nets a $4.8 million indemnity fee, territory indemnity fee that the NBA allowed them to do. And on top of that, the $3.2 million entrance fee to the NBA. So you're talking about $8 million.
So
Plus Bo had promised Doc a substantial raise.
Yeah.
So he could not afford to get into the NBA, and that was the main goal. So he had no choice, and he offered the Knicks Dr. J to waive the payment, and the Knicks didn't take it. So I put a curse on the Knicks, a curse of Dr. J, that as long as they stay alive, they'll never win another championship. And so far, they haven't.
Neither have the Nets.
How old are you? How old are you?
Me? Well, I think I'm 30, but I'm 61.
I'm not wishing no will on you just because I want the Knicks to win. I wouldn't do that.
The other thing was, don't forget the Nets, from the moment they agreed to enter the NBA, had the deal with the Brendan Byrne Arena, which they thought was going to be like Giant Stadium and they were going to sell out every night. But they didn't realize that most of the people weren't going to travel from Long Island to see the Nets play every night, whereas the Giants fans had their season ticket holders for years at that point. And it's only 1 day a week. But even now, even before the PSAs, Giant fans just stopped going because it's such a hassle to get to that stadium.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I went to a game once and we were coming back. We went to the 1:00 game. The entire Jets game was over and we still hadn't gotten over that bridge. It was a beach day and please.
Yeah. I was crushed.
Get out of the lot.
I was crushed when they sold because the Nets from 73 to 76 are my all-time favorite sports team, and I'm a huge Yankee fan.
Mm-hmm.
And they're by far my all-time favorite sports team. And I was 16 years old, and when Dr. J had to leave, and when they traded Brian Taylor, I was crushed. I mean, that's all I could say. I was crushed.
Talk to me a little bit about the team, and we'll stay with the merger for a second. I mean, they took in, if I remember right, the Nets, the Pacers, the Nuggets, who were the Rockets but became the Nuggets, right? And the Spurs. Am I missing anybody? Was it just the 4 teams?
Just the 4 teams.
Yeah, I said Indiana, right?
Oh,
how did the Kentucky Colonels not become part of the NBA? They drew, didn't they? Weren't they a good franchise?
Yeah, but I think he was losing. He was losing money. In fact, that's why he sold Issel to the Baltimore Claws. He was losing, even though they won a championship in 74-75. I think he was losing money, so he took the buyout, the $3 million.
This is John Y. Brown.
Y. Brown, yeah, he took the $3 million buyout, and then of course he got back into the NBA with the Buffalo Braves.
And then traded the whole franchise for the Boston Celtics or something. Right. Another story for another day.
And of course, the Spirits with the Silner brothers making the deal of the century. I think they just stopped being paid.
I wanted to get into that too, right? They made out probably better than anybody during the merger, right?
I think they got $800. Don't quote me, but I think like $800 million. And I think the buyout stopped maybe a few years ago.
Yeah, because
the deal of a lifetime.
They end up getting a piece of the TV rights to the
NBA,
right?
Well, that's why they got the money.
Yeah.
And
amazing. They had the worst, not the worst team in the league. Right.
Well, that was the reason why the NBA couldn't keep going, because they couldn't get a national TV contract. They got a partial TV national contract, but they couldn't get a full national TV contract, and that was why they couldn't compete financially.
Why not? How can a league with Irving and Gilmore and all these great players not get a TV contract? What was holding it up?
And they even hired Jack Goff.
The NBA didn't have a good one either. A lot of times, even the Knicks were shown late at night.
Right.
I know.
They didn't think sports would draw. All these other sports would draw the way somebody figured out they would. I remember reading something about that, not necessarily about the ABA, but a lot of things like the home teams. I don't. A lot of people don't remember this, but like when I was a boy, you didn't see the Giant games. You would see the Steelers a lot. It didn't become a rule that you had to show the home teams until about
the blackout rule, right? If they didn't,
no, it wasn't. The Giants sold out, so it had nothing to do with that. They just showed the game that they thought they would make the most money on. People want to watch. So it wasn't until about 77 when you started getting the home teams on TV in football. They were slow to if they knew now. It's a lot of things they just never guessed. Like like if you see a picture from the 70s at Yankee Stadium, there's like no gear whatsoever.
Right.
You might see an occasional Yankee hat from Cap Day, but that's it.
Yeah. No, in the 70s, sports was different. I mean, especially basketball. It was hurting in the 70s. It was
basketball just didn't evolve. It didn't evolve. People just liked the game it was. And then when the ABA came, it became exciting. But just
but they didn't have the faith to give him. Yeah, they didn't have the faith to give him a TV contract. But that's what it was. Financially, that's why.
Yeah, that's the finals were on tape delay, right, at 11:30 at night. I think in the NBA even then. So you guys got to read a good book. Maybe you've read it, From Hang Time to Prime Time. It's a book by Peter Croyata, I think is his name. He's from Ithaca, New York. I had him on my show here a few months ago. It's a great book, and it starts out around that era. It starts out with Walter Kennedy and the NBA and the whole conversations with the ABA around the merger and how everything evolved from there. It's a really good book. You guys would probably both enjoy it if you see it out there. So there's a little shot for Peter and his book. But
by the way, you want to know what still aggravates me the most about that Julius Erving sale? Everybody forgets that the Nets had traded for Tiny Archibald to dish the ball off to Erving. Now, as good as Brian Taylor was, he wasn't Tiny Archibald, who led the league in assists, by the way, on that horrible Nets team. And to dish off to him and Williamson would have been the most amazing thing to see.
Yeah,
they never got to see it.
Yeah. He needed to star once he got rid of, he traded Taylor and Jumbo Jim Eakins, and I'm sure it didn't make up the whole salary. I think Archibald's making $450,000 a year, but he needed to star. But minus the Taylor, Eakins, and Erving contract, he could afford, I guess, to do that, and he needed to star. So that's why he made that trade.
The Nets had another great player you guys haven't mentioned, and Larry Keenan.
Oh yeah.
He just had
another guy slipped away.
I mean, I know he won like sixth man or something in the NBA, but it wasn't a very long good career. He started. I don't know. Did he get hurt? Steven, would you know?
I think I'm not sure, so I can't really talk on it. But he did well in the NBA. He did just as well for a while.
I have no idea why the Nets even traded him for what was his name, Swen Nader.
Yeah, the trade where they got Nader and House Jones and Kim Hughes. Well, the reason they made that trade was because St. Louis Spirits in 74-75 with Lucas and Barnes, they out-muscled them. So he needed muscle and he needed toughness. So he wanted to get Swen Nader, who was a fantastic rebounder, and House Jones, who was, tough physical guy. And that's basically, Larry Keenan was more like a Dr. J type player.
Wait, wasn't it Rich Jones or was it
House, Rich Jones? Rich Jones, yes. Yeah. And Keenan was kind of like the mirror of Dr. J, whereas House Jones was a tough guy. He could be physical, rebound, and Swen Nader, he wanted the muscle. That's the main reason why they did that trade.
If you guys had your druthers, would the ABA have stuck around? You're not a fan, Steven. There was a way they could survive.
I didn't mind the merger. I mean, just being part of a solo league, I always wanted to see them play the Knicks.
Yeah.
So, and they would play preseason games where they would go all out. Unlike today, where you don't go all out in exhibition, they would go. They would
go out in those games. Yeah.
The Knicks did not want to lose to the Nets, and they frequently did.
Right. Well, the NBA wanted to beat the ABA in those games because they hated the ABA. They stole the players. They caused them to pay more to keep players. And the ABA, of course, had something to prove. And the ABA won 65% of those exhibition games between 73, 74 to 75, 76. And that's a lot of people don't realize that. And so.
I mean, if you would take, those are exhibition games, which again, I'm not saying it doesn't hold some water.
Exhibition games were different back then.
Yeah, well,
back then they played. Every game they played. Played.
I'll never forget when the Giants beat the Steelers in a preseason game in like '73 after the Steelers won a Super Bowl. How furious Jack Lambert was.
So if I took in the middle of the '70s those great net teams, the Colonels, and the Pacers. Let's say those three teams. They're the most consistent teams through that 70s period. Would you disagree? You wouldn't disagree with that, I don't think. And I stuck them in the NBA. Would one of those teams or more, one or more of those teams have won championships?
In my opinion, guaranteed. Even though I rate the Pacers of 72, 73, and the Nets of 73, 74, 75, 76 as good, better maybe than the 74, 75 Colonels. I think the most likely team to have won a championship I think the Colonels would have beaten the Golden State Warriors with Rick Barry in 74, 75.
Interesting.
Yeah,
sure.
Most of the ABA teams, the starting five was as good or better than the NBA's. The problem is there's a real lack of depth, even on the Nets' good teams.
Well, that's why I'm getting at. I don't know if they could. Yeah, over long haul, I don't know if they could stick with them. I mean, they'd be very good and very competitive. It's just
in a 7-game series, they could stick with them. You saw that. I think that's the problem was towards the end of the season in 74, 75. I don't even know that they were out muscled. I think they were exhausted. The Nets.
Well, yeah, that's what Doc told me.
You can't believe how many minutes Irving used to average.
Right. Well, that's why they were exhausted, and that's why they were out muscled. Yeah, Doc told me that. That was the main reason why they lost. I asked him that question in 2015. I told him I waited 40 years to ask him that question. He laughed. But I think the teams that you mentioned did have the depth. So they would have done good. The Pacers.
Well, I look at the Nets team. Remember, most of that depth made it to the NBA on the Nets because they just didn't have Irving, and they couldn't win 9 games. So I don't think they really had the depth.
Brian Taylor told me that the 75-76 team had the depth over the 73-74 net team, but the 73-74 net team had the better talent, i.e. the starting 5.
Yeah.
But the Pacers, the Colonels, the 75-76 Nets, those teams had good depth, and they would have. I believe they could have beaten any of those NBA teams back then.
Yeah, it would have been good competitive basketball for sure. Listen, before we wrap up today, guys, I want you each to give this a tiny bit of thought, not too much, but give me your all-time starting lineup for the ABA.
Oh, I've done that. I have like 5 teams. But my all-time starting 5 is Dr. J, Dan Issel, barely over McGinnis, Horace Gilmore, barely over Mel Daniels, Matt Calvin, and Louis Dampier. That's my starting 5.
Matt Calvin. Interesting.
Yeah, he was.
Matt Calvin would probably win. He just another one of those guys that had injuries. I might go with Matt Calvin too. Unfortunately, I agree with him on most, but I'd go with John Williamson simply because he's my favorite and I can be that.
Williamson was good, but he wasn't.
I got 2 years of leading with the Nets team players, but give me your team anyway, George.
I would go with Dampier and Gilmore in a second. There's no way that Billy Paultz was. Because as a matter of fact, at some point I was like going through. I have a membership to newspapers.com, and Billy Paultz would bully people until he got to Horace Gilmore. And then he wasn't rebounding. So I easily go with Gilmore and Louis Dampier in there. And, once he said Matt Calvin, I think I got to say, and then Julius Irving.
Yeah.
And Connie Hawkins would be the other.
Connie Hawkins
was sneaky good. He was sneaky. He played Cowens very well, and he gave Gilmore trouble.
Yeah.
Paultz was sneaky good. Good shot blocker. He was like the 3rd best shot blocker in ABA history. Most people don't realize that.
He stuck around for a long, long time.
15 years, and every year his team made the playoffs.
Yeah, he could. I think I could jump as high vertically right now at 61 years old as he could at his peak.
He's just a great worker, and he had a good shot. Good, nice shot.
You got to go with Horace Gilmore at the center and Louis Dampier as the point guard, I think. I don't think you really have a choice there.
Well, we know this much. If the ABA did that, the ABA, cultivated a lot of great players who came into the NBA. It changed the way the NBA played forever with the 3-point shot coming in. Obviously, the game being more wide open.
Yep.
The coaching, the way that the coaches approached the game, for the most part, changed the minute that merger happened, and for a lot of reasons, because some of these great athletic players that came into the NBA.
There's one more guy that the Nets had that we didn't really talk about, but he had his bigger years on other teams, George Carter. People forgot how good he was.
Yeah, rest in peace. He was a very good scorer. The bridge between Barry and Irving on the Nets.
Well, guys, give me your before we wrap it up. I'm gonna give each one of you a little a couple of minutes if you want to kind of give me your last take on your memories of the NBA, what it might have its lasting legacy. Let's label it that. What's the AB's lasting legacy for you, George? And I'll let Stephen wrap it up.
How much fun the games were. That movie about the ABA, the comedy. I mean, all the little individual scenes in there were true, like the bear wrestling the grizzly bear, and the bear actually getting loose for a minute or two. I mean, he didn't chase people around the crowd, but he got out of the cage and it scared everyone. It was exciting. That red, white, and blue ball and the 3-point shot. I mean, now the 3-point shot's just redundant, but nobody had seen that before. I used to call Brian Taylor the Mad Bomber, and he probably never took more than 6 3-point shots in a game.
Right now,
I thought he was like a mad bomber.
It takes 6 1/4 now.
Yeah. So it was how exciting they changed the game. People forgot about the penalties. What did they have? Like 3 shots to make 3 points sometimes on certain fouls.
Yeah, an extra foul shot. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you even got 3 shots to make 2. It was like they just wanted those high-scoring games.
The no foul out rule.
I think if you played defense, sometimes you got a technical foul.
There was a no foul out rule, Stephen?
Yeah, the ABA had that. The no foul out.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think they got extra shots when you had a guy on the floor that fouled out.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You got extra shots. That's why I think the 3 shots came in where you got 3 shots to make 2 and 2 shots to make 1. I think that's where that all came in.
Well,
and go ahead, Stephen.
For me, the ABA, I think, before Bird and Magic, the ABA saved the NBA's game. They had financial troubles. A lot of franchises were failing. TV ratings were failing. And Dr. J and the ABA with Thompson and Garvin and Gilmore, they put renewed interest back into the NBA. And, I don't watch much NBA now, I admit it. But every time I hear people say, oh, they play like the ABA. And so many things that the NBA, I'm told that the NBA has adopted, the game is the way it is now is from the ABA. And they play this, a similar, style. Although the ABA played more defense, from what I understand. The NBA, from what people tell me, the NBA, they just shoot threes and that's it now. The ABA was a lot more involved than that. They had a lot more plays. They didn't just shoot threes.
Yeah, the ABA was much more fun there than the NBA is a lot of nights now. That's for sure. I agree.
When I'm old and I'm dying, can I say one last thing? When I'm old and I'm dying, and the last thing I'm going to remember about the ABA is how Williamson used to spin that ball on his free throws and even his regular shots.
All right, let me give you guys a chance to plug your groups and whatever else you might want to plug. Stephen, go ahead.
Well, honoring and remembering the ABA 1967 to 1976 is a great ABA website on Facebook, and we have over 15,000 members. And there's several ABA fan groups that, if you're interested in basketball history and the ABA, you should join.
And George, it's not ABA group, but go ahead and plug one of my favorite groups. I love the ABA group. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got 2 things I'd like to plug. I've got my Horace Clarke Years site, which is 7,000 strong, which is shocking considering how many people I've had to throw out for being nasty. Because we had a couple of American League players that left the group because they were being rude to them, like Larry Gowell. And so I just throw people out on the spur of a moment now. But anyway, the other one, my friend who's going to be the first one to listen to this because he loved the ABA, he has a podcast called Retire There. With his wife, because they're looking into retiring. So they talk to people who've retired all over the world and the United States.
Oh, cool.
So it's called Retire There. So all the ABA people are probably reaching that age now, Stephen. So you could listen to that podcast.
Well, I'm trying to get there myself. If I had some of that money Dr. J had on the table, I might be already retired, but not yet. Well, I want to thank you guys for coming in tonight, and we'll do something like this again. We'll get Brian in eventually too, and
Brian, I want to be on. I call it.
Nice seeing you. I wish you could see me, but nice seeing you.
Next time we'll try to see. We got to find out if you're even a real person. You could be in a witness protection program for all we know.
I know. It's because he has no picture on his Facebook page either. I think he's lying.
I'm the Howard Hughes of the cancer.
Well, I thank you guys. I'm going to wrap up the show. I'm going to take you guys out. If you want to talk for a quick minute when I get done wrapping up the show, stick around. If not, I enjoyed having you on, and we'll do this again. I'll see you around in the groups. Thanks again.
Great. Yeah, I'd like to ask you something.
Okay, I'll be right back. Thanks, and thanks to you too, George.
Okay.
So that was our Remembering the ABA hour and the Nets, I guess, with a little emphasis on the Nets. I had a lot of fun. I want to thank Stephen and George for coming on today and sharing their memories. Check out their groups, guys. As I mentioned, honoring and remembering the ABA as Stephen mentioned. There are some other great ABA sites, but his is probably the strongest for sure. When you're looking at 15,000 members, that's a strong group no matter what you're doing. And check out George's Horace Clarke group, and don't post outside of the years that are listed, because there's a guy that's going to copy and paste the same answer for everything every time you do it. So please don't do that, guys. Check out. We'll be back Sunday morning with our Stream of Consciousness show. We'll be talking about everything going on in college football, professional football. We'll be sharing your comments. We'll be debating probably with Carlos right and left. And Carlos probably didn't see the ABA, but I can't wait to see his response to some of this stuff. So don't forget the college football huddle on Wednesday nights as well at 7 p.m. right here on TGI Sports Talk on the Northeast Streaming Sports Network. Keith Engel, I will see you later. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.